Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is I, Emily Sophia, aka Mighty Sophia, here to break down for you guys the latest episode of Bates Motel. We are on season 5, episode 7, Inseparable, which pretty much describes me and this show. So spoiler alert before I dive into the mad thick of things, as I shall be endeavoring to bear all in this review. And of course, bear in mind that this is just the beginning of the conversation. I implore you guys to bring up anything that I forget or neglect to mention in the comments below. You have your missions, and I entrust that to you. So let us get into this rich and melancholy and fun and shocking episode. It is just a smorgasbord of emotions, which basically every episode in this final season has been. But man, is Dylan's re-entry into the fray at Bates Motel in his return to White Pine Bay something of terrible beauty. And that shocker at the end was also another thing that I did not see coming. Dylan actually witnessing Norman flipping the bird at Mother and turning himself in for the murder of Sam Loomis. That is not a development that I saw on the horizon. But then again, I am just committing myself to staying in the moment with the show. It's so exciting that way. I encourage you to do the same. Unless you want to bend over backwards to make your predictions, which I really couldn't blame you for, because there is so much to sink our teeth into, our prediction teeth, I guess. But anyways, so Dylan makes his way back to White Pine Bay at long frickin' last. And here is an opportunity for him to maybe finally reach his brother and really be Norman's brother in the post-Norma era. Because he is so remorseful over her loss and devastated. And I have to say that Max's acting was on point. I was really engaged in his performance, and seeing him break down in Norma's bedroom with her robe sitting there in the window was just... It was a good kind of gut-wrenching, and I really felt like that was good to experience. But yeah, so in the midst of losing Norma, he figures it is the least that he can do to finally step up to the plate and try to save his brother and to actually be that to him. And this is the first time that Norman has experienced real human connection with someone to whom he is related, and somebody who actually knows him, unlike Madeline, who only really gets a taste, and it's an interesting one at that. But yeah, since he took Norma's life, this is that first time, and it's finally someone who wants to save him, and unbeknownst to Dylan, to just save Norman from the visage of the woman he loves, and the woman with whom he wanted to die, so as to secure their eternal togetherness, and in so doing destroy the torturous distance between them. Just reminding you of that delightful situation. But yeah, so Dylan's return signals the beginning of the end for Norman's chimeric fantasy, and that also coincides with his insecurities about taking the life of another human being, which again is the first time that he's done so of his own volition since the failed double suicide. So Norman wanted to be together with Norma for forever, but Mother is kind of a different story as things have turned out. So the blood-soaked contract is getting harder and harder to abide by with every passing day, especially as more and more people begin to congregate around Norman and cloud his sense of loyalty to this undying figment of his imagination. And the question is whether Norman is going to choose Mother above all else, because she is going to fight like hell for him. And if you watch the preview for next week, it is clear that she is going to, unfortunately, take matters into her own hands. That is not what Norman wants, but it's that desperate times call for desperate measures thing, and she is not having it with his incarceration and subsequent pharmaceutical divorce, between them. But yeah, so is he going to choose Mother at the end, Or is he going to choose to honor the memory of Norma by choosing his flesh and blood family? And whatever situation that's going to look like, we actually have no idea. And we end this episode with so many questions. What does he intend to do about Norma's body? Who's going to discover it? Can Chick's typewriter keep up with all of these scintillating developments fast enough? In which setting will Romero finally have a showdown with Norman? Because we see that he actually makes it to the motel, but chances are no one's going to actually be there. I don't know the time frame of things yet, and so many questions, but I'm going to go ahead and walk y'all through all the events of the night. Let us hash this out. So we begin by zooming away from the lifeless eye of Sam Loomis, who is dead in a pool of his own blood. Mother, of course, is annoyed at the fact that Norman left the shower faucet running. Maybe he was just basking in the iconic drama of it all. Can't a murder mistress show a little bit of understanding for her boy? But she's not having it with the whole shell-shocked routine. She ain't got time for that. So Mother steps in, shuts the water off, and lovingly reminds Norman that he is playing in the big kid's side of the playground now. So she just tells him, big deal, you'll live. Later there will be time for contemplation, but they've got shit to do. So Mother sends Norman away to change, and the rest is history. Or not quite, because we cut to the car ride to the body dump, and Norman finally says, I just killed someone, Mother. This is the first thing that he says since the incident. But, this is what he gets for asking questions. He gets to take matters into his own hands at last. And so Mother berates Sam, of course, for taking a sweet-ass time with handling this change of pace. But then the two of them glimpse the telltale reds and blues of police lights that seem to be at the scene of a pretty massive crime, and surely enough, what went down in the lake is coming back up, and those are bodies, for sure. And speaking of things that come up, so does Norman's dinner, although it's not in a body bag. So Mother, of course, with another of her classic one-liners, pulls the whole, it's gonna be a long night, oh darn. But, so the two of them are trying to hash things out in the car, and Norman knows that this had to be Jim Blackwell. He panics and he frantically relays precisely how the authorities are going to zero in on them, but that's when Mother freaking punches Norman, because she's fed up with the whole unhinged routine. But then Norman clocks her in the jaw immediately after, which is ridiculously jarring and unpleasant to behold, even though we know that it's Mother. But like mother, like son. So Mother brushes off this offense against her lovely psychic facade and insists that they have to focus above all else. So where's it going to be? The cliff or the woods? And Norman's starting to wonder just how many times they've been doing this. How long have they been in the body dumping plus motel business? And so then suddenly Mother seems to actually grasp the gravity of the situation, and she tears up in this moment that is far too Norma-esque for comfort, Long has it been since we last saw the whites around Vera Farmiga's baby blues glisten with fear and vulnerability, but for once she kind of recognizes the severity of the plight, and rather than brushing it off with nonchalance that only the dead can muster, she lays it all on the line. Essentially, if Norman can't pull himself together, they're going to lock him away and drug him up. And so shall the cord between their hearts be forcibly amputated as Mother is drugged into non-existence. So once again, she scoffs at all the emotional bullshit, returns to the pragmatism, and walks them through the post-mortem laundry list. So we get to see the two of them arguing and bickering like a married couple as they drag Mr. Loomis's dead body through the snowy forest and ultimately chuck him into a well. But of course, before that happens, Norman hesitates and he's trying to come to terms with what he's done and whether Sam even deserved this violent fate for the mere crime of being a total asshole. But this is not the time or the place, though, at least not in Mother's book. She decides to loosen the vice-like grip that he has on the cadaver as he's contemplating the meaning of life and death and his role as its reckless knife-wielding arbiter, and she decides to let the bastard plummet, and And another line that I love was when she was like, if she had a penny, she'd make a wish. There's no time to mourn at this point. So then they go and ditch their ride, and as they're walking back to the motel from that, in the many miles of cold, Mother speculates about the location of her luminol and all that good jazz. That's a fun little throwback. And then Norman debates actually turning himself in, and what do you know? That's what he ends up doing later on. But of course, we can't be sure of that. But Mother would rather slip into his body and do the talking than yield to his better judgment. But of course, that's the dynamic the two of them share. But just as the two stroll up to the motel at the kiss of dawn, we see that Sheriff Green makes landfall. So Norman decides that he can take it from here. He doesn't want Mother in the driver's seat anymore. That's not going to be the case for long. And then she says, "Don't do anything stupid if you love me." I think that's a line applicable to many situations. So we see that it is showtime, and it may be linen day on Norman's end, but Miss Green's airing out some dirty laundry of her own. And some of Norman's might have gotten mixed in there, but don't tell nobody yet. So then, of course, she happens to notice the roughed up gravel in the parking lot, and then Norman stumbles his way through some half-baked excuses, as we knew was going to happen, and it's just gloriously awkward. And like I said, when it comes to those half-baked excuses, Mother has always been the master of the kitchen. He probably should have tossed her the keys and, out of the fryer and into the frying pan. But Green feigns belief in Norman's odd tale of the not real guests from the night before, too, only painting himself further into a corner, but this is what he gets for taking control. So in the meantime, we see that Romero's friend Maggie is trying to nurse him back to health with antibiotics and breakfast in bed, and he asks about the whereabouts of the gun he had when he arrived, but it seems she's holding it for safekeeping, and we do find out that that is the case later on. So Norman, after the exchange with Sheriff Green, decides to tell Mother about the bodies, plural, of course. She looks completely unsurprised, as I would expect. And, so all of a sudden, though, what's really cool is the change in Norman's mannerisms, because all of a sudden he is as cool and as calculating as a cucumber grown in Mother's secret garden. And he tells her about how they're going to rid the house of any incriminating evidence that could further entrench them in the brewing investigation. And that's when Mother asks where they're going to put her. And she stammers in that moment, which is so fascinating. Mother having to address the existence of Norma, who essentially cancels out her existence. And now here's a line that I absolutely adore from the episode. Whoever has been writing for Norman specifically, I know it's probably different writers episode to episode, or I don't know exactly, but they are doing a freaking bang up job. The poetry is just on fire, because we get, it's like, the spot in the woods up the mountain pass, there will be snow there, and there's that beautiful little clearing by the abandoned cabin. We found it once when we were collecting foliage there, and the Mother was like, whatever, let's just get it done. And it's interesting to see that increasing divide between who Norma was and who Mother is. And Mother is not a fan of the fact that Norma came before them. But yeah, so of course, before the two of them can go and take yet another scenic hike, Norman suggests that Mother, go to the motel and put up a new shower curtain in his stead. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Am scree, beloved Mother. Blood is thicker than water, but I gotta say that in this case, the passive aggression runs the thickest of all. Yeah, say that. So after sending Mother away, at once attempting to preserve her persona and prevent her from coinciding with her dearly departed likeness, we see that Norman goes to the cold storage throne room. I was wondering when that was gonna happen, so at long, long last. And then we cut to his next woodland excursion as he is agonizingly wheeling Norma's body in a wheelchair over the uneven turf to this perfect resting place for her. Some say the world will end in fire, others in ice. Chick set Caleb to fire a few episodes back, but Norman has other plans for Caleb's sister. Plans that involve him actually returning to her intact. So he says that he's going to come back for her and that he loves her, and then lays her to rest a second time, presses his lips to her icy cheek. He's hoping that the cold is going to preserve her as she lies beyond the loving embrace of the house on the hill that they lately shared. This is another exciting subversion of the original story, in which, of course, she's found dead in the basement, and it's this whole big scary moment. But this leads us to wonder who's actually going to come across the fallen Ice Queen. I am definitely open to your theories in that regard. So anyways, Norman returns from the funeral, and that's when he finds Dylan in the motel parking lot. And the two are really civil since they last spoke. And Dylan makes his way around the house, finds cigarettes on the piano, and heels next to one of the living room chairs. So yeah, he's not exactly comforted by the fact that Norman has been living alone, because that means that Norman placed those things there, arguably over the past year or two. But then, he tells Norman about his marriage and his daughter, and Norman seems genuinely affected by the announcement, and the apologies begin to flow from there. And he says every day is a small century, as he's expressing remorse over failing to get in touch after all that time. But then Mother, of course, is lingering around the corner, making her presence known only to the man from whom she derives her sadistic life. Got that sky blue jacket just bright against the dimness of the hallway, keeping those outfits on point. And Norman, of course, prickles at the voyeurism, and he's like this gazelle that's in cahoots with a lioness that could devour him at any moment, So Dylan presses further about Norman's psychiatric appointments, which Norman reveals have subsided, and so has his adherence to his medications, as Mother quietly waxed in his liberated mind. And so then he whispers, like he's trying to say it out of earshot of Mother, that, the thing is, he does miss their mother so very much that he can't even tell him it's just not the same, nor will it ever be. Now that is a real burn on Mother's part. But he insists that there is only one way in which he can live from here on out. And so then we get another scene with Romero, of course, hashing things out with Maggie, trying to get his gun back and all that good jazz. But I'm not going to linger there because we have some important ground that we got to cover before I wrap up this review. So Norman wakes up the next day, and she's telling him that Dylan is misguided and he's asking too many questions and being too intrusive. And the price that they pay for it having the arrangement they do is that it can only be them. So he decides that he can ease the termination of their brotherly ties with a nice little send-off dinner, which is just so thoughtful. And now here's where things get crazy, because Dylan makes a discovery that's actually news to all of us, and that is that Dr. Edwards has been missing for a freaking year. So that chance roadside encounter and cafe reunion was like a last-ditch effort on part of Norman's psyche to save him from further entanglement in Mother's web. And of course, remember in the episode Dreams Die First, he saw Dr. Edwards while Mother was still missing after the Madeline fiasco, and then we found out what she actually did later. So all of this is Norman's imagination grasping for straws and trying to remind him what Mother fundamentally is, which is this aggressive, weaponized coping mechanism, truly. And then no sooner does Dylan come back to the motel that he finds Madeline trying to work her way up to Norman's doorstep, but he promptly sends her away on the grounds that Norman is mentally unwell, and she is, of course, looking for her wayward husband, and more on that later. But she's stunned to find that Norman is anything less than a gentleman with a fondness for old and beautiful and motherly things, But once Dylan is back in the house, he finds the immaculate kitchen and the candlelit spread of gourmet delights, and then he tells Norman about Madeline and her missing other half. And Norman's pulling out all the stops and trying to lay on the charm as thick as Mother is crafty. But even with the culinary fanfare before them, Dylan decides against beating around the bush. He's a guy without guile, which actually serves him really well in this instance because he just kind of cuts right to the chase, And he asks Norman if he knows where Sam is, but Norman doesn't want to get into that right now. That can come later. So then Norman tells Dylan the tragic tale of Sam and Marion's ill-fated trysts. And then he demands that Dylan stop trying to confuse him and meddling with the truth, which is an interesting thing to say on his part. So he starts begging Dylan to let him live how he needs to live. And he's as flustered as the night that he let Marion go free, honestly, because I think he can feel it coming in the air tonight. A little bit of Phil Collins there for you. Yeah. But anyways, Dylan just asks for Norman to trust him. He's his brother and he loves him. And we feel all of that in the moment, and it's super powerful stuff. And then, of course, that's when he pops the pharmaceuticals, and that is a mistake. And he says that he just needs to see Norman take one, that's all. So Norman goes over to the sink and takes a deep breath and begs Mother to stay out of it, but then immediately Mother turns around. She's like, I just want to talk to him. So she interjects, and then that's when, of course, Norman lithely turns around in that very mother-like manner, and she's kind of fingering the pill in her hands, and it's like, I know that you mean well because you have always meant well, and you may not believe me, but I am so proud of you and I love you. And things are getting really emotional and intense. But then, unfortunately, I can only ever be a real mother to one person. And so, even though I love you so very much, and this pains me, you're getting in the way. And that is when Mother leaps. The trap is sprung, and she deals this nasty freaking blow to Dylan's skull and tries to finish the job. Tries being the operative term. But of course, Norman is able to restrain her with all his might, and he knocks her back on the table and wrests the knife from her hand. And so he successfully beats Mother to the punch and then decides to go for the gusto and turn himself in for the murder of the one and only Sam Loomis. The best laid plans of mice and men and estranged brothers. I tell you what, but good golly gosh. I am just so elated that the direction that the season is taking continues to be ever beyond my grasp, and to see this turn in the relationship between Norman and Dylan, I think is really well timed now that we have wrapped up the Marion arc and we get to explore this division in which Norman is caught, because now he has enough of a sense of himself and of right and wrong to really be able to challenge Mother and her authority and her dominion. But she is now doing everything. It's so fascinating that ultimately, if we are to understand Mother as this defense mechanism, we see that Norman's love for Norma is so inextricably linked with that survival sense that now Mother is fighting to keep herself alive, perhaps because Norman deep down is afraid to be without her and to face the consequences of his actions and what he has done, even with Norma, or rather with Mother, controlling his body. So trying to disentangle all of that is so much fun. and that's part of the unique experience of the show, and it's something that I am going to miss so terribly, is trying to keep my mind working on both levels, in the attic, in the basement, and everything in between. So I would love to hear your thoughts, your theories especially, because I know that I tend to be pretty light on the predictions of things, and judging by the fact that my previous predictions so did not come true, I'm just kind of in it to see what happens. And now we have three episodes left. Mother's gonna be back in the business. She's gonna come out swinging. Romero's gonna do something, I don't friggin' know, if he finds a stupid gun and tries to bring all this to a head, but remains yet to be seen. So I'd love to know your thoughts. Love to. Thank you guys so much for watching. Anything I missed, bring it up in the comments below. And you guys, please, I implore you, take care of yourselves. As always, I will be back before you know it.